there. Ready for another deep dive with us?
Always ready.
Today, we're going to explore something I think you'll find pretty fascinating. The psychological collapse of Germany in World War I.
Yeah, it's a really interesting area,
I mean, we often get caught up in the battles and the weapons and all that, but
Yeah.
the mental game, the war within the minds of the soldiers and civilians, that's where the real story unfolds.
I think that's a great way to put it. It's like this invisible battlefield.
Exactly. And to understand it, to really get into it, we've got some fascinating sources for you today. We'll be checking out excerpts from Ivojna Światowa, Upadek Moral Niemiec,
Okay.
which is a historical analysis of the war, and drawing insights from the Imperial War Museum's War in the Mind exhibition.
Oh, that exhibition is just brilliant. It really brings home the impact of the propaganda, the scale of the weaponry,
Yeah.
and just the personal experiences of everybody involved. It
Yeah.
creates this intense psychological atmosphere.
All right, so let's unpack this. So Germany, in 1918, experienced this shockingly rapid collapse in morale that led to, a swift end to the war.
Yeah,
And this is surprising because, they anticipated a long conflict.
they did.
What happened?
Well, I think a key piece of evidence is a chart that was created by the U.S. Army during the war, which tracked German morale alongside their military position and food situation.
Okay.
And the correlation is striking. It's like as conditions deteriorated, so did their will to fight.
Wow, so you can almost see it like a graph. You can see their hopes just fading away.
Yeah.
So initially, there was a lot of enthusiasm, right?
Right.
Weren't the Germans pretty fired up about the war at the beginning?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the historical analysis calls it war fever.
Yeah.
When war was declared, the German public, they poured into the streets celebrating, convinced of a quick victory.
Oh, wow.
A glorious victory.
Seeking their place in the sun
Yeah.
as a powerful nation, as the analysis puts it.
Exactly.
But, and here's the catch, Germany was relatively new on the world stage.
Yeah.
And they didn't have the resources for a long fight.
They didn't.
What do you make of that?
Well, I think their strategy hinged on a swift victory.
Okay.
They were aiming to take out France quickly and then pivot to Russia.
Wow.
It was a gamble.
It was.
And when it failed, the psychological fallout was huge.
Huge. And the Battle of the Marne in 1914, that really shattered those hopes.
It did.
Instead of a quick victory, they got bogged down in this grueling stalemate of trench warfare.
Yeah.
The Western Front became a nightmare.
Oh, yeah. The historical analysis
Yeah.
really drives that home. It paints this really visceral picture of life in the trenches. Constant fear,
Huh.
the deafening roar of artillery, the ever-present threat of death. It was a completely new way to wage war.
And terrifying.
Oh, absolutely terrifying.
The industrial scale of the weaponry must have been just overwhelming.
It was.
Massive armies, machine guns, poison gas.
Right.
It's easy to see how the psychological impact would be just as devastating as the physical destruction.
Absolutely. One example that stands out from the War in the Mind exhibition
Okay.
is the German Minenwerfer trench mortar.
Okay.
Its shells had this really unusual tumbling motion as they flew through the air. And this created, a real sense of dread in the British troops because they couldn't predict where they were going to land.
So it wasn't just the physical damage, but the psychological effect of this unpredictable weapon.
Yeah,
It must have been terrifying not knowing where the next shell was going to hit.
absolutely.
And this went on for years, right?
That's the key. It wasn't a single battle. It was the prolonged, static nature of trench warfare. This constant exposure to danger combined with the boredom and just the monotony of daily life in the trenches.
Yeah.
That created this immense psychological strain.
Yeah.
Nothing in their prior military experience had prepared them for this.
You can only imagine the toll that would take. The fear, the lack of sleep, the loss of friends. It's like being trapped in a nightmare that you can't wake up from.
Exactly.
Did this start to show, in how the German soldiers were behaving?
By 1916, the cracks were starting to show.
Okay.
Germany had suffered nearly 1 million casualties by that point, and that started to erode public support for the war back home. People began to question, the price they were paying for this elusive victory.
Yeah.
And remember that initial war fever
Right.
that was fueled by this promise of a quick resolution. Now, that promise was broken.
And it wasn't just the mounting casualties, right?
Okay.
The historical analysis also points to this growing resentment among the soldiers themselves.
Oh, absolutely. They felt betrayed by the inequalities between officers and ordinary soldiers.
Right.
Disillusioned by the seemingly endless bloodshed.
Yeah.
Some even began to question the very reasons they were fighting.
Wow. There are some powerful quotes from German soldiers in the analysis that really capture this sense of despair. One soldier wrote, "We all know that we are being sacrificed for the interests of a clique.
Right.
We fight for the Prussian Junker economy, the ruin of the German people."
Powerful stuff.
It is, and another one lamented, "Let us hope we can all eat out of one pot again, and there will be no more masters and slaves."
Wow.
These words reveal a deep sense of disillusionment and betrayal,
They do.
festering within the ranks.
Absolutely.
It makes you wonder how they coped with such horrific conditions. I know smoking became a pretty common way to deal with the stress.
Yeah, the War in the Mind exhibition actually delves into that.
Oh, okay.
They have displays showing how cigarettes became this source of solace and distraction for soldiers on all sides. A tiny bit of normalcy amidst the chaos.
It's interesting how something so simple could offer a momentary escape from those psychological pressures of the trenches.
Yeah.
In Britain, they even gave out the Princess Mary gift box to every soldier, sailor, and airman.
Really?
It contained tobacco and cigarettes. It was a gift from the nation.
Wow, that's amazing.
But in Germany, the British blockade made even those small comforts scarce.
Yeah.
Tobacco prices skyrocketed,
Wow.
and people were mixing it with other substances just to get their fix.
Oh, wow.
Imagine the added frustration of not even having that small escape.
I can't even imagine.
And the blockade wasn't just impacting tobacco.
Right.
Food shortages were becoming a major problem.
Oh, absolutely. Poor harvest combined with the ongoing blockade led to this widespread hunger and malnutrition,
Wow.
both among the soldiers on the front lines and civilians back home.
It's a stark reminder that war isn't confined to the battlefield.
It's not.
The home front is another battleground.
Absolutely.
And the psychological impact of, deprivation and hardship can be just as devastating.
Yeah, without a doubt.
So we've got dwindling morale on the front lines, increasing hardship at home. It seems like German leaders were facing a real crisis.
They were.
What did they do?
Well, they knew they had to act, right?
Yeah.
Facing this dwindling morale, they ramped up their propaganda efforts.
Okay.
Which is all about bolstering support for the war, demonizing the enemy,
Right.
and trying to reignite that sense of national unity they had seen at the beginning of the war.
Yeah, the War in the Mind exhibition actually displays some of the posters that were used in this campaign.
Okay.
And they're visually striking. They often depict the enemy as monstrous, barbaric.
Right.
It's a pretty classic tactic, isn't it? Dehumanize the enemy to justify the violence.
It is, yeah. It's very effective.
Propaganda is a powerful psychological weapon.
It is.
It's not just about recruitment. It's about manipulating emotions,
Right.
maintaining morale, and convincing people to keep fighting even when all hope seems lost.
Absolutely.
And in a desperate bid to turn the tide, Germany made a gamble that backfired spectacularly.
They did.
Unrestricted submarine warfare.
That was a high-stakes move in 1917. It was aimed at starving Britain into submission. And, the German leadership knew it risked drawing the U.S. into the war,
Yeah.
but they were desperate for a solution.
I mean, put yourself in the shoes of a German citizen at that point.
Yeah.
You're already dealing with food shortages, your loved ones are on the front lines,
Right.
and now the most powerful nation in the world has joined the enemy side.
Yeah.
What impact do you think that had?
Oh, it was a devastating blow to morale.
Yeah.
It dashed any remaining hope of a quick victory and confirmed their worst fears.
Yeah.
A long, drawn-out war against an increasingly powerful enemy.
Yeah.
The American entry was a major turning point, not just strategically,
Yeah.
but psychologically as well.
So German morale hits rock bottom, but then
Yeah.
a glimmer of hope emerges from an unexpected source: Russia.
Yeah.
The collapse of the Russian government in 1917 and their subsequent withdrawal from the war provided a much-needed boost for Germany.
It did.
It was a sign that maybe, just maybe, the tide could turn with Russia out of the picture. Germany could focus all its resources on the Western Front.
Yeah.
This was their chance to try and win the war before American troops arrived in force. One last shot at that elusive victory.
Right.
But was this really a turning point or just a temporary reprieve?
It's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
The historical analysis describes this renewed sense of purpose, almost like a desperation, in the German ranks.
Right.
But there were deep cracks beneath the surface.
Yeah.
The war had taken a tremendous toll on the country.
Almost like a house of cards.
Yeah,
This fragile optimism built on a very shaky foundation.
absolutely.
What were some of the problems brewing beneath the surface?
Oh, for one, the home front was far from stable.
Okay.
In January of 1918, there was this massive strike involving up to 1 million German workers, many from vital industries,
Wow.
like armaments. It really crippled Germany's war effort.
You have to imagine the frustration. People are being told to fight, to sacrifice, but they're struggling to feed their families and seeing this glaring inequality between the ruling class and the working class.
Absolutely.
This strike was a symptom of a much deeper issue.
It was.
It showed just how deeply the war had impacted German society
Right.
and how close they were to a breaking point.
Right.
The promise of victory was ringing hollow for many.
Yeah, it was.
And then there's the issue of the territories that Germany gained from Russia in the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk.
Right.
Weren't they supposed to provide much-needed food?
They were. They were
Yeah.
supposed to be like a solution, a way to alleviate the food shortages.
Right.
But in reality, these areas were in turmoil, requiring, a significant military presence just to maintain order.
Yeah.
The promised influx of food never materialized.
Wow.
Instead of solving the problem, it added another burden.
Another gamble that didn't pay off.
It didn't.
It seems like every time Germany tried to find a way out, they just dug themselves deeper.
They did.
And even among the soldiers being transferred from the Eastern to the Western Front, there was this growing despair.
Yeah.
The analysis mentions that nearly 10% of these soldiers deserted during transport.
Really.
They were simply unwilling to continue fighting a war that seemed increasingly hopeless.
It's hard to imagine.
Wow, think about that.
Yeah.
To abandon your post, risking severe punishment rather than face the prospect of continued fighting,
Yeah.
it speaks volumes about the state of morale at this point.
It does.
And they were walking into an even worse situation on the Western Front.
Absolutely.
As these demoralized troops arrived, they were met with another challenge. A massive Allied propaganda campaign specifically targeted at undermining their will to fight.
Oh, wow.
Those leaflets dropped on the German trenches. I remember seeing some chilling examples in the War in the Mind exhibition.
Yeah.
They were designed to sow seeds of doubt, weren't they?
Absolutely. One particularly effective tactic was to emphasize the vast resources of the Allies, especially the influx of American troops and supplies.
Right.
It painted a picture of an unstoppable force that Germany could never hope to defeat.
Yeah.
Imagine you're a German soldier, exhausted, demoralized, and you read about these endless waves of fresh American troops arriving with the latest weapons.
Yeah.
It's hard not to feel hopeless.
It's like psychological warfare on a whole new level.
It was.
It preyed on existing anxieties and fears, amplifying that sense of despair within the German ranks.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you have these internal problems simmering, strikes, food shortages, desertions,
Right.
and then this external pressure from the Allied propaganda machine.
Yeah,
It's a recipe for disaster.
it is.
And in the midst of all this, Germany launched its final desperate gamble, the Spring Offensive of 1918.
The Spring Offensive, also known as the Kaiserschlacht, it was like a last-ditch effort
Right.
to break through the Allied lines and secure a victory
Yeah.
before American reinforcements could, fully deploy.
Okay.
Bold move. And initially, it seemed like it might actually work.
The historical analysis talks about these new stormtrooper tactics that allowed German forces to make some pretty significant gains early on.
Yeah,
Was this a case of innovative tactics catching the Allies off guard?
absolutely. I mean, the stormtroopers were elite units,
Oh, God.
highly trained in infiltration and close quarters combat.
Right.
They bypassed heavily fortified positions, focused on disrupting enemy command and control.
Wow.
New approach.
Yeah.
And it initially, threw the Allies off balance,
Uh-huh.
but it came at a cost.
Yeah, I was going to say that those initial successes couldn't last forever, right?
They couldn't. The German advance outran its supply lines, and their artillery just couldn't keep pace.
Right.
This logistical nightmare, it prevented them from capitalizing on their early breakthroughs.
Uh-huh.
And then there were the casualties.
Yeah.
By April 10th, they had suffered 300,000 casualties, many of them their most experienced soldiers.
Oh, wow. It's hard to imagine the impact that must have had on morale.
It was.
To get so close to a breakthrough only to be pushed back again.
Yeah.
With such heavy losses.
It was devastating.
Yeah.
The psychological impact was devastating. That initial optimism just evaporated, replaced by, a growing sense of dread.
Yeah.
They'd thrown everything they had into this offensive.
Right.
And it had failed.
And the Allies didn't just sit back and watch, did they?
No, not at all.
No.
Sensing an opportunity, they launched a series of counteroffensives.
Okay.
At the Marne in July and Amiens in August.
Wow.
These marked a real turning point.
Yeah.
The beginning of what became known as the 100 Days Offensive.
Yeah.
The tide had turned.
Yeah. The Allies now had the advantage in manpower, weaponry, and, crucially, morale.
They did.
They had weathered the storm.
Yeah.
And were on the offensive, determined to finish the fight.
Yeah.
This must have felt like an unstoppable force to the German soldiers.
Oh, absolutely. The historical analysis highlights the Allies' superiority in tanks and artillery, which played, a key role in breaking through German defenses.
Right.
They were also pioneering new tactics.
Okay.
Effectively coordinating infantry, artillery, and tanks.
Yeah.
It was a combined arms approach that the Germans just couldn't match.
And all the while, those propaganda leaflets kept coming.
Yeah.
Can you imagine the psychological pressure? You've endured years of unimaginable hardship, your friends are dying around you, and then you read these leaflets emphasizing the futility of resistance.
Yeah.
Urging you to surrender.
It was a combination of factors, the military defeats, the relentless propaganda, the sheer exhaustion of years of war.
Right.
It created this perfect storm for psychological collapse.
Yeah.
As the historical analysis puts it, the most critical factor in any conflict is the belief in victory.
Uh-huh.
And when that belief evaporates, it becomes almost impossible to continue fighting.
It's a tragic situation to think of these soldiers, many of whom had fought bravely for so long.
Yeah.
Now reduced to a state of utter despair, giving up hope.
It is. It's tragic.
Yeah.
The War in the Mind exhibition actually has this, poignant artifact that really brings this home.
Okay.
It's a pocket watch taken from a surrendering German soldier by a British soldier. And, the British soldier later recounted sharing a cigarette with a German soldier before taking the watch.
Yeah.
It's, it's a small detail, but it really highlights the human cost of this collapse.
Yeah.
The personal stories behind the statistics.
It's a powerful reminder that these were individuals.
They were.
Not just numbers on a battlefield.
Absolutely.
And it wasn't just surrenders, was it? The analysis also mentioned something called shirking.
Yeah, shirking was essentially, going AWOL, refusing to participate in the fighting.
Right.
By some estimates, up to 1 million German soldiers were shirking their duties in the final months of the war.
1 million.
Yeah, 1 million. Wow. It was just a complete breakdown of discipline, a sign that they had lost faith in their leaders and the cause they were fighting for.
So it's a collapse on all fronts, both physically and mentally.
It was.
On top of everything else, wasn't there a devastating flu pandemic at this time?
Yes, the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918 was another blow, adding to the already horrific situation.
Right.
This deadly virus swept across the globe, hitting Germany particularly hard.
Yeah.
It just ravaged the exhausted population, both at home and on the front lines.
It's hard to fathom how anyone could endure so much suffering. It's no wonder the will to fight simply evaporated.
It is.
And on September 29th, 1918, the inevitable happened.
Yeah, that's when German commander Erich Ludendorff, facing the reality of the situation, admitted to Kaiser Wilhelm II that the war was lost.
Wow.
His words were blunt. The German army has reached the end.
Yeah.
The troops can no longer be relied on.
It was an admission that Germany, both physically and psychologically, was broken.
It was.
It's a heartbreaking end to what was a truly brutal conflict. And with Germany on the brink of collapse, the other Central Powers, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, and the Ottoman Empire, they soon followed suit.
It was a domino effect. They'd been propped up by German strength.
Right.
And without it, they crumbled under the pressure.
Yeah. On November 3rd, German sailors, ordered to sail out for one last suicidal attack against the British Royal Navy, mutinied.
Wow.
It was a final act of defiance.
It was.
A refusal to sacrifice themselves for a lost cause.
Yeah.
They had simply had enough. It's a powerful statement. And just a few days later, on November 11th, 1918, the guns finally fell silent. The armistice was signed, bringing an end to the First World War.
But sadly, the psychological scars of the war, they didn't disappear with the signing of the armistice.
You're talking about the stab in the back myth.
Exactly.
The idea that Germany wasn't truly defeated on the battlefield,
Yeah,
but betrayed by its own people.
absolutely. Instead of acknowledging, the complex factors that led to their defeat, the strategic miscalculations, the logistical failures, the immense psychological pressure, many clung to this idea that they had been betrayed by these internal enemies.
Yeah.
Socialists, pacifists, Jews.
So instead of confronting the difficult reality of the situation, they created a scapegoat, a way to avoid the painful truth.
He did.
And this myth had a profound impact.
It did.
It poisoned the political landscape in Germany,
Absolutely.
fueling resentment and extremism,
Yeah.
and ultimately contributing to the rise of the Nazi Party and the horrors of World War II.
Right.
It's a sobering reminder that the psychological wounds of war can have far-reaching consequences,
It can.
shaping not just the immediate aftermath, but the course of history for generations to come.
They do.
It also highlights the importance of understanding the psychological dimension of warfare.
It does.
It's not just about battles and technology, it's about the minds of the people fighting those battles.
Right.
The civilians enduring the hardships on the home front. It's about morale, resilience, and the will to fight, or the lack thereof.
Absolutely.
This deep dive has certainly given me a lot to think about. The interconnectedness of everything, the military situation, the economic conditions, the propaganda, even the Spanish flu.
Yeah.
It all played a role in creating this perfect storm that ultimately broke the German spirit. What stands out to you as the key takeaway here?
I think it's the enduring power of the human spirit, both in its ability to endure unimaginable hardship, but also its fragility in the face of prolonged trauma.
Right.
Wars are incredibly complex.
They are.
And we have to look beyond the battlefield to understand a true cost of conflict.
Absolutely. It makes you wonder how the psychological impact of war has evolved in the modern era. We have social media, 247 news cycles, the constant bombardment of information.
Yeah.
It's a whole new landscape. What do you think?
It's a fascinating question.
It is.
And one that deserves a lot more, exploration. I think we've seen the rise of PTSD.
Right.
The challenges of reintegration for veterans.
Right.
And the spread of misinformation and propaganda online. It's a whole new frontier in psychological warfare.
Definitely a lot to ponder. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this too. How do you think the psychological impact of war has changed in the 21st century? Share your insights in the comments and keep the conversation going.
Yeah, and if you're interested in exploring this topic further, we've included links in the description to some books, articles, and online exhibitions that, you might find insightful.
As always, subscribe to our channel, like the video, and comment below. There are also some links in our description that you may find useful. See you in the next episode. Bye-bye.